Strange grills, quirky infotainment systems, and strange reliability issues are just a few of the 12 most awkward fails in BMW history. Let's get into it now. Right here we have a conventional look. Kidney grills, angel eyes, that's a style that they've carried for years and everybody knows that. Since 2020, their over-styling has gone out of control. We don't even almost recognize a lot of the brand anymore. Over-styled, over-engineered, over-designed, and a lot of enthusiasts have lost their touch and desire for buying the brand. With this new BMW X3 called the M50, look, they've gone and put this shiny flat plastic grille on the front. While it has a bit of a resemblance, they've also lost the angel eye look. Now they put in these check mark LEDs. The X5 has pretty much doubled up on the size of the kidney grills as well, making it almost unrecognizable. And some of the over-styling, even details like this, almost feels like something straight out of Pep Boys or Canadian Tire. And then the X7 is an attractive SUV. It really doesn't even look like BMW, and it's certainly not true to the roots in any way, with an entirely new upgraded design of headlights. Sure, it looks wonderful, but it's not really true to the brand. Even the big logo on the top is bigger than the average one you're finding on a lot of other models. Bucktooth right here, what were they thinking? And their electrification brings a whole new element of disaster in styling. I mean, look at the iX, for example. Sure, it looks futuristic, it looks stylish, and it probably looked great on a CAD drawing, but it get that out in the real world and it just looks odd. I mean, even as you look around the over-styling around the humps, the over-styling on the back end, this iX here is just a really odd looking unit all the way around. Got these little strange handles, and it's just a quirky little vehicle that almost looks like a minivan. Not sure what they were thinking there, because let's face it, this little M6 still has a gorgeous look to it, as does this M340 here. Still looks relatively BMW, similar headlights, and the grille is still relatively small. But when you look at the brand, it seems to have lost a lot of its identity. The grills are different size, the headlights are a little bit different. Every single vehicle looks quite substantially different, which is fun in some regards, but it looks like a long lost cousin rather than a sibling. Another big failure is the overuse of touch controls, haptics, capacitive controls. I mean, look at this BMW X7, for example. As we look inside, you've got the large screen that goes from A-pillar past to the center point. You've got capacitive buttons. You've got all kinds of shiny black plastics, some of which don't wear all that well. A lot of it is integrated with big LEDs that are just light up the dashboard like a 747 cockpit. And the vehicle just lacks its classic look with knobs and buttons and that quality tactile feel that many enthusiasts loved over the years. See, because here's the BMW that we love: quality components and parts that are easy to use. They're easy to find and they're at the fingertip. That's what we miss about modern day BMWs. Another catastrophic miss by BMW are the infamous run flat tires. It does seem like a win for a lot of people that just don't know better. They sell you on the fact that, oh yes, you don't have to change a tire roadside. Yes, you can drive the vehicle home. Tires heavier duty, it's safer to run at higher speeds. And there's all of those benefits that they paint for you, but they don't necessarily give you the drawbacks. The tires can be 2 to 3 times as much money per corner. But wait a minute, you can't always just replace it, because what if you get a nail in that tire or run flat? If you're less than about 60 or 70% of your tread wear on that tire, then chances are you've got to replace not just one, but multiple. So if you're dealing with an all-wheel drive vehicle like this that utilizes all 4 corners, you can't just replace even a pair. Quite often, if you're down to a certain level, you actually have to replace all 4. On top of it, if you get a nail in that tire, most tire shops will not plug it and fix it because they believe it's compromised the integrity, because the extra layers and the metal that's in those tires do help to actually give you that extra stability. On top of it, they have a slowing rotating mass. They're a heavier tire. They're less performance oriented by a long shot. And in many cases, they tend to squeak and roll. As you roll down the road, sometimes they start emitting noises where regular tires won't. Another colossal failure for BMW was what a lot of manufacturers were going through. It was just a sign of the times. And what it is the SMG gearbox. That's sequential manual gearbox. And this is what it looked like in the E60 M5, which was built from around 2005 to 2010. Here you have power. You could alter from 400 horse to 507. Here you have dynamic stability control and electronic differential control right there. Here you could alter the shift speed right here with the little control. You could up it, you could down it, and you could shift this vehicle either manually by pushing forward or back, or you could use it with the paddle shifters right here. But the problem was this wasn't overly reliable. It used a lot of different components. It was essentially a manual gearbox that used a set of actuators and controls and electronics to force the gear shift in a sequential manner. Up, 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 down, down, down. You couldn't skip gears per se, and it was just what what the technology was at the time. Now, a lot of people gave these manual gearboxes or these SMG gearboxes a hard time, but if you think about it, Lamborghini had the E-gear system. That was the same stuff. Same with Ferrari's F1 gearbox. Even Lexus and the LFA used a single manual gearbox or automated manual gearbox, which also was not all that reliable, and it was very clunky, very jerky and lurchy type of shifting patterns. That being said, if you do turn it all the way up, it feels energetic, lively, and it hits hard. Now, it's exciting, but the problem is it's also hard on the gearbox, as these tend to eat up clutches. Not like the dual clutch systems today. Same thing with the Lambos, Ferraris, and beyond. A lot of them had to do clutch changes before time's up. And with these BMW, the SMG was no different. Now, what we're finding with a lot of these cars as they're aging, the SMG pumps, excruciatingly expensive. You can't even find them anymore brand new. And as far as I could tell, the part has been discontinued. So you've pretty much got to send out what you've got, get it rebuilt, overhauled, possibly find some used units. I've seen on eBay for about $20,000 to $25,000, you can get yourself a used one. From a reliability perspective, they're absolutely horrific, expensive to look after. One of the biggest fails with BMW is some of their early connected app systems. You know, things like Apple CarPlay, for example, Android Auto. Now, things have gotten better in the newer equipment, like the modern day BMWs have, again, closed the ground and closed the gaps again. Their first attempt at some of the earlier integration of apps were a huge fail and a huge miss. While other manufacturers are doing great things, unfortunately, BMW was sort of lagging behind and missed the boat. Now, another big failure on BMW was a couple of key engines around a similar time frame in a generation very similar to this. It was the gas engine called the N20 and the diesel engine called the B47. They both had catastrophic engine failures. A lot of them were related to timing chains. A lot of people love them. They were fun little performers. They also had issues with engines piling up, carbon fouling, timing chains that would snap. But unfortunately, during the same era, we also had an N47 allegedly had similar issues. So the problem with the N47 diesel was that they went and put the timing chains at the firewall. You could not preventatively check on your timing chains. It was very difficult to replace them or fix them. And so ultimately people just rolled them out. And the timing chains had problems with the guide ramps that would crack, and the plastics in the N20s or the N47s would have those ramps that would crumble, collapse, and then the chains would buckle. And if your timing chain goes out of sync, that's your pistons and your valves colliding, and it's over, all over but the crying. Another massive colossal failure for BMW was introduced in the E60 generation. So around that 2005, 2010, what we're sitting in right now is an E60 M5, but all generation had this active steering. Intention was to really give you a better control, and it wasn't just a power steering. It was supposed to be a little more dynamic, a little more intuitive, but this active steering became a vague steering experience. You didn't get the feedback on the road. You didn't get the feeling of where the car was positioned. And quite often, a lot of people complained that that vague feel just took the engagement out of the driving experience. And we clearly saw that back in around 05 to 2010, one of the big failures for BMW. On top of it, components related to that steering program were extremely expensive. They failed, they were failure prone, reliability was a challenge, and it's just more complexity in a car that you just didn't need it. I mean, BMWs, we think about the older E39 M5 was one of the best generations because it had an NA V8 that was sort of reliable. It had a manual gearbox that was highly available. Many people loved it because it was still sort of the outgoing, the exit gate, if you will, to some of the old school BMW. The E60, what we're in today, was sort of the entrance to the new tech. And that new steering system were one of these new technologies that they introduced. Then, unfortunately, it was expensive, it was a swing and a miss, and one of the biggest BMW failures. So this monstrosity looks like it took over where the F07 5 Series GT left off. That's right, the GT 5 Series, it was trying to be like a SUV or a hatchback combination. They put a V8 engine in under the hood that was ultra unreliable, called the N63. And it was just one of those problematic engines that nobody wanted. It was an odd duck, it looked squirmy, it looked quirky, coolant leaks, turbo problems, oil consumption, you name it. One of the big flops for BMW was the first generation iDrive system. So from 2001 to 2008, but if you look at it, you click in, there's a bit of a delay. Now you can back out of that, you go into there, there's a delay. So everywhere you go, navigation isn't necessarily the best either. You know, sure, you use these great details, like you've got this great knobby here, and it's very simplistic in this sense, but the fact is you had to do a lot of menu operation instead of back in the day where you could do it all via buttons and controls and knobs. Sure, while they were one of the pioneers in iDrive systems and this sort of integration, it really didn't inspire. The first generation of iDrive systems was absolutely abysmal, and clearly one of their biggest failures. The next huge fail for BMW was the era of 2001 to around 2008, the Bangle Butt they called them. The 7 Series was clearly the worst and the ugliest of the bunch, but even this you could see the family resemblance. It's weird circle back here, and even this M6 does have a different look to them. It's not necessarily the most attractive look, and that Bangle Butt era had some of the worst transmissions, a lot of the SMG gearboxes in the M6s, the M5s, even the M3s. A lot of the SMG gearboxes were single automated manual. They weren't all that reliable. The 7 Series had a lot of expensive tech that would fail. The engines weren't great. Some of their naturally aspirated V8 engines in some of the 7 Series cars or even the 5 Series cars. A lot of the cars that you found in that era were some of the most unreliable vehicles. The Bangle Butt era was the design perspective that wasn't great, and it was just from a time when BMW was a swinging and a missing left, right, and center. Another failure was the first generation BMW X6. Well, a lot of people thought it was very polarizing. They looked at it and said, well, that's intriguing, it's interesting, but I'm not sure I can get on board, because it's largely on the same platform as the X5 of the same time frame. And the X5 was a practical, very popular SUV. But then along came the X6, and it was their first attempt at doing something that was more of a crossover SUV. Obviously, it had much sharper window lines, very difficult to get in. I found myself bumping my head trying to get into these vehicles, but it was also a bit of a precursor to what we're seeing today. But the modern day X6s have a little bit more usable space getting in, a little bit more functional. Right here we have a newer generation. You'll notice the hip lines are very similar. It does look attractive in that black, and of course, other than these rear grills, you see that ventilation's a little different. You get the little high mounted wing on these, a different rocker panel. It is largely actually quite the same, but for some reason this rear window section here is just slightly larger, and it feels like there's a wee bit more access in that driver door to get in. Now, many would consider this a colossal failure by BMW. This is the S85, the V10, and as well the S65 was the V8 of the same generation. We're talking about starting around 2006 and going up from there. We had engines that were naturally aspirated, F1 inspired, high revving V10 and V8 engines that produced anywhere from 400 for the V8 up to 507 horsepower in this V10. They were absolutely spectacular to drive. They made the best sounds in the industry, but they were fragile. The durability just wasn't there. Now, whether it was a matter of poor oiling, the wrong oil type, or the wrong viscosity going into these engines, or whether it was the rod bearings that were too tight a tolerance and created too much excessive wear, or whether it was overzealous owners that fired it up and loved to rev it because it was a rev-happy engine, all of those were contributing factors to these engines not lasting. As a matter of fact, the S65 and the S85 engines were only good for 50, 60, 70,000 miles before you'd have to do rod bearings. If you got it quick enough and early enough, you wouldn't have a catastrophic failure, and you could continually religiously changing rod bearings every 50,000 miles. Underneath this intake, they had things called the throttle actuators. They had plastic gears. They'd strip out, bing, check engine light. Next thing you know, you're in limp mode and you've got to take it in. Those were usually $2,000 to $3,000 to get that sorted out. The problem is a lot of those parts, you'll put a new one in and it'll be the same problem, these plastic gears. Same with the variable valve timing system, the Vanos systems, they get rattly, they stop behaving properly. And Vanos is their variable valve timing. It gives that nice smooth power, the torque down low, and it gives the high revving up top. If in fact you're holding a steady rev and it's hunting and it's maybe you're losing that breathing power, it doesn't have the throttle response down low, or maybe it's running out of steam up top, those are all typical factors when you're dealing with variable valve timing systems failing, and the Vanos were some of the big issues. So the engines were fragile, and as a result, if BMW could have sorted those problems out, created a little more durable engine, who knows where this engine could have gone. But even with some of the biggest failures in BMW's histories, believe it or not, there's the cars I would buy and I would strongly suggest you look at as well. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon. See you then, everybody. Bye-bye.